Hello and welcome to today's lesson. Today we're going to be talking about lesson 6 in chapter 9, and we're going to be talking about how to solve a right triangle. So that if you are given all three sides of a triangle, can you now find the angle measures? All right, so in this first question, determine which of the two acute angles has a cosine of 5. So we have two acute angles. We have an angle A and we have an angle B. So if we're going to find, what do they say? Cosine. So if we're going to do the cosine of A, that ratio is adjacent over hypotenuse. So adjacent, so from A, adjacent is going to be root 3 over the hypotenuse 2. And they're looking for it to come out to be 0.5. Well, I don't think that's going to be 0.5. So by process of elimination, it's got to be angle B is the acute angle. So let's just find it. So the cosine of B would be adjacent, and the adjacent side to B is going to be 1 over the hypotenuse 2. Well, 1/2 is the decimal 0.5, so that is correct. All right, so find the value of x, then find the value of the sine, cosine, and tangent of the angle. So they want us to be able to find those angle measures. So right now, I'm sure you guys can all find x. Because this is a right triangle, we can use the Pythagorean theorem. So x squared plus 7 squared equals 10 squared. So really, we're going to subtract 7 squared from both sides, and then take the square root. So really what I'm going to put in my calculator is the square root of 10 squared minus 7 squared. And for this one, I think I get x to be 7.1. Okay, what we don't know how to do and what this lesson is all about is, can you find this angle measure? Well, let's look. From this side right here, if we know this is the side opposite and this is the hypotenuse. So we're going to do the sine of theta is 7 over 10. Now in math, we have all kinds of opposite operations. So like when we're solving 2x equals 10, that says 2 times x. So we do the inverse operation of dividing by 2. If we have something that says x squared equals 81, we do the inverse or opposite operation that cancels it. So when we take the square root and square it, those two things cancel out, so you're left with x equals, and then the square root of 81 is 9. Now remember, we can use 9 and -9 in this one. So what is the opposite of the sine of theta? And if you look at your calculator, and right above on your calculator of the sine button, you have this, sine -1. So that means the inverse sine. So that's what we're going to be doing, is taking the inverse sine of 7 over 10 is going to get us the measure of theta. Okay, so in your calculator, we're going to have to hit the second button and then sine, and then 7 divided by 10. And I am getting something that tells me that theta is going to be 44.4 degrees. All right, let me erase this stuff over here. Okay, so that's what this screen is. The inverse tangent, the inverse sine, and the inverse cosine. So if you look right above the tangent button, okay, so if you have the button on your calculator and it says tan above it, right above it, you see tan -1. So that is the inverse tangent. And we use the inverse. We use the inverse to find angle measures. So whenever you're looking for an angle measure, you are going to have to use the inverse button so that it says this, which is typically right above the tangent. So we're looking at inverse tangent. okay, or inverse sine or inverse cosine, whichever one it happens to be that we're using. So in this particular example, it happened to be sine. All right, let's look at number 2. And again, if we're going to find x, we can use the Pythagorean theorem. So we can set up 15 squared plus 22 squared equals x squared. So we're going to square root both sides. So when I do this one, 15 squared plus 22 squared and take the square root, I get x to be approximately 26.6. All right, so now if I'm going to find theta, so from theta, what do I know? Well, this is the side opposite, and this 15 is the side adjacent. So what ratio has opposite and adjacent in it? And so we're going to be saying the tangent of theta is opposite 22 over 15. And because we're looking for an angle measure, we're going to be doing the inverse tangent of 22 divided by 15 is going to give me the measure of theta. Okay, so go ahead and plug in that in your calculator. So you hit your second button and then tangent and 22 divided by 15. And I believe when I get that, we get 55.7, because I think we're rounding to the 10th. So if they ask us to round to the 10th, we're going to get 55.7 degrees. All right, so now that we've gone through 2, you give this third one a try. Okay, so stop the video, you give this a try, and then resume the video to see how you're doing. All right, I'm not going to go through the Pythagorean theorem here. I'm just going to tell you that x comes out to be 8.1. So in this one here, what do we know? From theta, we know the side opposite and we know the hypotenuse. So what ratio is that? That's going to be the sine of theta is opposite over hypotenuse. So we are going to be doing inverse sine of 5 over 9.5 of 5 divided by 9.5, and we're getting 31.8 degrees here. Did I do the wrong number? 5 divided by 9.5, inverse sine. I think I did that right. So what do we have? So from here we have opposite and hypotenuse. So we should have inverse sine, and I think I'm getting 31.8 degrees. Inverse sine 5 divided by 9.5. All right, so we talked about this one. All right, so here, when they just tell you the tangent of A and 0.75 here, so to do this, we're going to do inverse tangent of 0.75 is going to give us the measure of angle A. So second tangent, 0.75, and I'm getting 36.9 degrees. 36.9 degrees. All right, then this next one here, we're going to do the inverse of sine of 0.87. So inverse sine 0.87, and I got 60.5 degrees here, 60.5 degrees. All right, to solve a right triangle means to find all unknown lengths and sides. So they won't specifically say, find angle A, find B, C. When it says solve the triangle, it means find anything that's unknown. All right, so when we solve this one, they're giving us 3 things, which means we need to find 3 things. So we need to find the measure of angle A, we need to find the measure of angle B, and then we need to find the length of C. Now remember, these two are always complementary. So I like to solve for each one and then at the end add them up to be 90 rather than solve for one and subtract from 90, because that's a way then that I can check my work. Okay, so finding C, they tell me the two legs, so I'm going to take the square root of 2 squared plus 3 squared. Okay, you should pause the video and then you go ahead and solve these and then turn the video back on to see if you did them right. All right, so for C, I actually got 3.6. All right, so if I'm going to focus on A, what do I know? I know the side opposite and adjacent. So this is going to be the inverse tangent of 3/2. So the inverse tangent of 3/2 is going to give me the measure of angle A. So inverse tangent, 3 divided by 2, and I'm getting 56.3 degrees. Now, I could just subtract from 90 and find out what B is, but I just like to check my math to make sure that I'm doing this right. So I'm going to do the inverse tangent because I'm looking for an angle measure. And from B, opposite over adjacent is 3, and this is going to give me the measure of angle B. So now when you check that out, this is going to come out to be 33.7 degrees. And these two are complementary, so I must have done it right. All right, let's try these again. Actually, we're going to skip 6 and just go right to 7. So I'm going to skip 6 and go to 7. So the three things they want us to know here is going to be the measure of angle H, the measure of angle G, and the length of GJ. All right, so this is a hypotenuse and a leg, so I'm going to take the square root of 109 squared minus 91 squared. And this actually comes out to be a nice whole number 60. So this is one of those Pythagorean triples we were talking about. So now I'm going to do this from H. From H, what do I know? Well, this is the side adjacent, and this is your hypotenuse. So what ratio is that when we have adjacent and hypotenuse? So I'm going to set up the inverse cosine of adjacent over hypotenuse. So second cosine, 91 divided by 109, and I got 33.4 degrees. 33.4. So of course you can just subtract from 90, but I just want to make sure I'm doing this right. So from G, I know the side opposite, so that means I'm going to do the sine, inverse sine of opposite over hypotenuse. And when I do that, I end up with 56.6 degrees. And again, these two are complementary and they work out, so then I must have set them up correctly. All right, so now you are ready for your homework. So the big takeaway for today was finding the inverse. And whenever you are finding an angle measure, you're always going to have to do inverse sine or inverse cosine or inverse tangent. Okay, the inverse helps us find an angle measure. Good luck on your homework.